Hello, my name is Gary Johannes. I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist, founder of Inspired to Change, and a senior lecturer at CPHD. Now, I didn't come to this through a neat career path. No, I left school at 14, one of 9 kids. My mum always knew I was capable of more, but school just didn't serve me. So I joined the RAF at 16, and then when I left, I worked in sales and run bars and nightclubs, and that was the first 30 years of my working life. But underneath it all, I always knew I wasn't the person I was supposed to be. Like, there was a version of my life I couldn't quite reach because of what I believed about myself, because I'd always told myself I was too thick, because I just didn't see that I deserved success of any kind or type. In my mid-40s, I met people who showed me I was more than I thought I was. That's when I first came across hypnotherapy, and the idea that we can change, actually change. Before, I genuinely believed I was who I was, fixed. That was just me. But it wasn't. I retrained, and then after a while still running Inspired to Change and leading a great team, I took on a challenge of doing an MSc in Psychology and Neuroscience of Mental Health at King's College in London, which I achieved at 60. The same year I found out I had dyslexia and ADHD, which explains a lot. In fact, it explains everything. This podcast is everything I've learned in the therapy room, in the training room, and in my own life. We will look at one condition per episode, what's going on, what's keeping it going, and what actually helps. If you find it useful, do hit subscribe. There's a lot more to come. So let's get going. So, anxiety. Maybe your mind won't switch off. Maybe you're exhausted from overthinking. Maybe you're holding it together on the outside, but on the inside, something just doesn't feel right. If any of that sounds like you, you're in exactly the right place. This episode isn't going to diagnose you. What it's going to do is help you understand what's actually going on in your brain, in your body, and more importantly, what can actually help. Because here's the thing I want you to hold on to right from the start. Anxiety isn't a sign that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It's a sign that your brain is doing its job. It's just doing it a bit too much. So let's talk about it. Most people, when they think about anxiety, think about worry, that constant low-level hum of what if, the thoughts that won't switch off, that feeling that something bad is about to happen, even when everything around you looks absolutely fine. But anxiety is bigger than just worry. It's a full body experience. Racing heart, tight chest, shallow breathing, that feeling in your stomach that's hard to describe but impossible to ignore. Muscle tension, sometimes dizziness, sweating, sometimes that strange sense of being slightly outside yourself, like you're watching your own life from a step back or two. Sound familiar? Here's what's actually happening. When all of that kicks in, your brain, specifically the part called the amygdala, has picked up what it thinks is a threat. And it's done exactly what it's always done, what it's been designed to do for thousands, if not millions of years. It fires off an alarm. Adrenaline, cortisol, your heart speeds up, your breathing quickens, your digestion slows right down, because if you're being chased, digesting your lunch is the least of your worries. This is the flight or fight response. And it's generally one of the most remarkable things the human brain does. The problem is, it was built for immediate physical danger, not a difficult conversation with your boss, not a health worry you can't shake, not the 12 things on your plate and no idea where to start. But your brain doesn't always know the difference. It just knows threat. And it responds accordingly. That's what anxiety is at its core. A survival mechanism, running in a world it wasn't built for. When I explain it like that in the therapy room, I almost always see something shift in people. It doesn't make it feel better straight away, but it makes sense. And when something makes sense, it feels just a little bit less frightening. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk about the numbers because this matters. In the UK, over 8 million people are dealing with anxiety disorders right now. 8 million. And that's just the ones who've been identified. Fewer than half of the people with generalized anxiety ever seek help. So if you're sitting with this, if you haven't told anyone, if you're not even sure it's bad enough to do something about, you're not alone, not even close. Anxiety does this thing where it makes you feel like you're the only one, like everyone else is coping and there's something specifically wrong with you. That's part of how it works. It narrows your focus, makes the world feel smaller and more threatening than it actually is. The reality is, this is one of the most common human experiences there is, and anxiety disorders are highly treatable. People recover from this every single day. Most people who get the right support can significantly reduce or even completely eliminate their symptoms. We'll get to what that looks like, but I wanted you to know that first. So we've talked about what anxiety is. Now let's go a bit deeper into what's actually happening in the brain, because this is where it gets really interesting. There are essentially two parts of the brain we need to talk about. The first is the more primitive part, the limbic system, which includes that amygdala. This is the threat processing part. It's fast, reactive. It doesn't stop to think. It just responds. And it's been doing that job for millions of years. The second is the more evolved part, the prefrontal cortex. This is where rational thinking lives, where we plan, reason, problem solve, see things in perspective. The part that knows, on some level, that the presentation next week isn't actually going to kill you. Here's the problem. When the primitive brain fires, when the amygdala decides there's danger, it effectively overrides the rational brain, floods the system with stress hormones, and suddenly, thinking clearly becomes genuinely difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. Which is why telling someone who's anxious to just calm down doesn't work. Their rational brain already knows that. But the primitive brain is driving right now, and it's not interested in reason. There's something else worth understanding too. The brain has what's called a negative bias. It's wired to pay more attention to potential threats than to positive experiences. Because a brain that misses a threat was far more dangerous than one that notices too many. So evolution gave us a brain that's constantly scanning for what could go wrong. In the modern world, constant news, social media, financial pressure, work stress, that negative bias doesn't have an off switch. It just runs. And with it comes the thinking patterns, catastrophizing, jumping straight to the worst, black and white thinking. It's either fine or it's a disaster. Then we have overthinking, running the same thoughts round and round without ever landing anywhere. Avoidance, steering clear of the things that make you anxious, which gives short-term relief, but long-term makes everything worse. None of that is a character flaw. None of it means you're weak. These are learned patterns, and a learned pattern can change. So, we've talked about what anxiety is. Now, let's talk about why it stays. Because this is the bit people don't hear enough about. There's plenty of conversation about what anxiety is. There's a lot less about why it stays. And understanding that, really understanding it, is where things start to shift. The biggest one is avoidance. When we avoid the things that makes us anxious, we get relief. And relief feels good. So the brain learns. Avoiding that helped. Let's do more of that. The avoidance gets wider. The comfort zone gets smaller. Anxiety gets bigger. The thing that feels like it's protecting you is actually keeping you stuck. Sit with that for a moment. Because it's one of the most important things I can tell you about anxiety. Then there's sleep. When we're anxious, we don't sleep well. And when we don't sleep well, when we're not getting enough proper REM sleep, the brain can't process the emotional experiences of the day. We wake up carrying more than we went to bed with, which affects the next night's sleep, which increases the anxiety, a cycle that just keeps feeding itself. And then there's serotonin, which plays a big role in mood and well-being. Our levels are significantly affected by three things: positive interaction with other people, positive actions, and positive thinking. When we're anxious, all three tend to drop off. We withdraw. We stop doing the things we enjoy. Our thinking gets darker. Less serotonin, more anxiety, less motivation to do the things that would actually help, more anxiety. Cycle after cycle. But here's what's important about cycles. They can be interrupted. They can be changed. And that's exactly what the solution-focused approach does. So we understand what's keeping anxiety going. Now let's talk about what actually helps. Solution-focused therapy isn't about going back through your past, looking for the moment anxiety started. It's not about unpicking your childhood or analyzing your history in forensic detail. It's about this, where you are right now, what's getting in your way, and what your life would look like if this wasn't holding you back. We start with what we call the preferred future. What does a normal day look like when anxiety isn't running the show? What do you feel when you wake up? What are you doing? What are you able to do that feels out of reach right now? Getting generally clear on, in detail, is more powerful than most people expect. Because the brain responds to what we focus on. Then we work on the three things that build serotonin: positive interaction, positive action, and positive thinking. Small things, incremental things, not a complete life overhaul, just one small thing that would feel slightly better than what's happening right now. Because that's how the brain actually changes. It's not in big dramatic leaps, in small consistent steps that build new neural pathways over time. That's neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. And it's not a theory. It's well-established neuroscience. The brain can change. People can change. I've watched it happen across 15 years of practice. People who came in barely able to leave the house, people who hadn't slept properly in months, people who were completely convinced that this was just who they were now. They changed, not overnight, but they changed. And before I close, I always want to leave you with something practical, not a list of 10 things, just one. Notice what's going well. I know it sounds almost too simple, but stay with me. The anxious brain, that negativity bias, is scanning constantly for threat, for what's wrong, for what could go wrong. So the practice of deliberately noticing what's going well, even the small stuff, the tiny stuff, it literally retraining your brain to look somewhere different. It's not toxic positivity. It's not pretending everything's fine when it isn't. It's just, the sun came out for half an hour this afternoon. The coffee was good. Someone held the door open. A song came on that reminded you of something good. These things happen every single day. We just stop registering them when anxiety is running the show. So ask yourself tonight, what went okay today? What's one thing that worked? What small moment was actually all right? Do that every day. It won't cure anxiety on its own, but it starts to shift the balance. And shifting the balance, that's how change begins. If this episode has been useful, and I hope it has, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. Every episode we take a different condition, always through the same lens, what's going on, what's keeping it going, and what actually helps. There's a lot more to come, and I don't want you to miss it. And if you're sitting with anxiety right now, if this has landed somewhere, I want to leave you with this. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not the only one. Your brain learned to respond this way. And the brain that learned, it can learn something different. That's not wishful thinking. That's neuroscience. That's what I've watched happen in real people more times than I can count. It starts with understanding what's going on. You've just done that. And that, quietly, without any fanfare, is a step forward. See you in the next episode.